Mike.
Hello.
The Thanksgiving week here in the US,
It gets quiet. Yes, I
it
know.
gets really quiet. It's
We
nice.
it's like I like July the 4th as well. Fantastic. Because we get to do some work without you guys bothering us all the time and having meetings. In
Yeah,
fact, taking this I'm on a holiday with my wife to Istanbul heading out on Thursday, so it doesn't really count this time around.
nice. Mateus, hi. Glad to see you
Hey,
back.
gentlemen. Good morning or good evening, wherever we are. And yeah, it's been a while.
Good
I'm sorry.
afternoon.
It's been hectic a couple of months for me lately, so I'm trying to catch up. I'm not yet up to speed.
Excellent.
I'll
Well, I'm glad
know
to
that.
have you back because I want to continue conversation on provenance today.
Oh, cool. Good timing. But
Yeah.
still, I haven't, been keeping tabs on all the efforts, so I'll need a couple of weeks to
Well,
get reacquainted with the current status.
all right. Well, it's been mostly around the different flows for credential acquisition. I mean,
Gotcha.
all right.
Hey
I
guys.
think we can wait for folks to join, but at the same time, I see no reason for us not to start, you know, getting um, getting going. So let's see, meeting minutes. Let me put this in the chat, the link. So please add yourselves. And the first thing I wanted to do today, just get it quickly out of the way, hopefully, because it's been sort of on our agenda for so long. I'm sort of tired of seeing it. I wanted to get through the entity relationship stuff. So specifically, what I'm sharing on the screen is this section. Okay. So before I turn this into a picture, I just wanted to go left to right. So I'm going to start saying things, and as soon as you have a comment or an objection, stop me. So we're going to start with something that's a concept for workload. So it's a template. It's not static, it's not executing, but we understand that, such a thing can come into being. And when it does, it can spawn one or several instances. Those would be executing things. Now, each workload instance can have one or more identities. So there's like one or many. Sometimes there are zero to many, but several identities. And
Well,
these,
stop there. If it's zero, then it isn't fully set up and is not a true workload. So one to many, I'm happy with. Zero to many, I'm not.
yeah, no, but we're saying one to many. I'm saying as like
Okay, you
in
said you
some
said it can
cases,
be zero. So I
in
just wanted.
no no in entity relationship diagrams, you can also have a relationship that's zero to many, and this is not one of
I
them.
know, but I'm saying that would not be
You're
appropriate.
correct. We're in agreement. So
Okay, good. Okay.
one or more identities, and these are aliases, and they're not necessarily correlatable. So I don't think we should be precluding that they're correlatable, but the reason you will have more than one, and I want to have like sort of a document explaining this, like why each relationship is the way it is, or sorry, a section explaining this. But you may present one identity to workloads that authenticate to you and a different identity to workload you're authenticating to. In fact, you may be authenticating to multiple different workloads. And when you do, you may get different identities for each. But then
Yeah,
for
and
everyone,
I think the interesting use case there is if the workload is a personal agent that acts on behalf of a human, for instance, because then definitely you want non-correlable identities because you want privacy preserving relationships.
yes. And also, I want to make a note in our workflows. Just want to put a note in workflow or interaction diagrams.
And I would add to Manu's point that humans can fulfill many roles. So I can be a mother, I can be a teacher, I can be an executive, all at the same time,
Yeah.
and the identity that I'm presenting will be different. I think actually
Absolutely.
I probably would struggle with being a mother, but as an example.
Absolutely. So that's why we're basically saying they're not, and also not necessarily correlatable. Means in some cases you actually do not want to uh, two relying parties to be able to figure out that they're talking to the same
Yeah.
entity. Or in some cases it's not a problem. So for every identity, you can have one or more identifiers, right? So again, in the human realm, I have a driver's license that has a number. I have a passport that has a number. Hank, you don't need to raise your hand right now. There's only four of us. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, just being polite. Sorry. Hi. Identities and identifiers, these are terms that only raise eyebrows, I'm afraid. So, like,
But we define them. We have a definitions document. So
yeah,
anybody,
okay. Okay. Yeah, let's give it a try, but there might be feedback on that. Just highlighting again.
yeah. We need to define terms. And if people don't like our definitions, they can say that.
Okay.
But
Yeah,
we
okay.
can, if you want, we can revisit our definitions. They're in a
Yeah,
separate document in
it's not
GitHub.
about the definitions, it's the terms, but that's fine. We'll use the placeholders for now. I'm keeping my mouth shut
Yeah.
about that.
All right. So we'll have several identifiers, and those can be correlatable within an alias, right? So, for instance, somebody might have, a table somewhere that basically says if you see this fingerprint, it belongs to someone, with this driver's license number. But for the way to make two, and again, we can say that in the companion description, to make two identities non-correlatable, their identifiers should be uncorrelatable as well. All right. So, and then for every identifier, you can have, and this is one, it could be for one identifier or maybe for a group of identifiers. I do not know. That one can be dicey. You can have credentials, one or more. And again, you can have multiple credentials because they have different expiration times, different lifetimes. But that's all I have right now. I'm wondering if we should, if you can spot any problems with this or any.
I think it's probably out of date, but it used to be the case that more than one person could share a passport. You could have your wife and or your children on your passport. I don't know if that's still the case anywhere, but it would be nice. Might want to be aware that might not be a perfect example.
So you're saying there may be a many-to-one relationship between a well, and by the way, a passport is a credential. A passport number is an identifier.
Yes, but it'd be all on the same passport number. I think they stopped doing that, but it used to be the case. We just might. It's
okay.
Yeah,
well,
honestly,
I don't know if that's for Workload that's relevant, but if it is, so any other, because again, like I'll spin up some kind of drawing, tool and put this into a picture, but just wanted to see if there's anything else.
Yeah, in our system, there's one layer, one additional layer here, which is a workload can act on behalf of more than one entity. And these entities, what we had to define are precisely if you had, for instance, a passport that represents a group of individuals, then it's the group of individuals that has an identity, identifiers, aliases, and all that good stuff. So it's an entity. So I wonder if it's worthwhile mentioning this here, or if we just want to say that because it really, right, there's a workload template that can be in our system called an agent, and then there will be multiple instances of that agent running on different machines, and each agent can act on behalf. It has the same business logic, it's the same code, but it can act on behalf of many different entities of a certain type.
Okay, I heard you actually say two things, and I want to see if they're really two things or one and the same. There is, and this is actually a realization that should probably also be addressed. we said nothing in this entity relationship diagram about delegation, right? So let me just put a note like this here.
Can you hear me, folks?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, we
Works.
can.
Okay, I was asking if you meant things like a workplace credit card or a workplace a departmental credit card. I mean, credit card's a bad example, but
No, it's not
that sort of thing.
it's not a bad example. The way we would actually model a credit card is indeed as its own entity, and you would have an agent that manages a credit card, and then you would have multiple human entities that have a relationship with a given with a
Okay.
specific credit card. So you have two workloads, one representing humans, one representing credit cards, and each one of the workloads act on behalf of a specific entity, a specific human, for instance, using a specific credit card in a specific transaction. So there's this, and indeed, I think, Mark, it's a very good catch that you can't address delegation use cases unless you have that level of granularity. I mean, that's what we've observed. We haven't figured out, I should say, it's not that you cannot, is that we have not figured out another way to do it.
Yeah. Well, so the first thing I said was delegation. The second thing that I heard you say, which is really new to me, so I don't even know how to think about it, is that you could be, acting on behalf of multiple entities or have multiple entities acting on behalf of you. Or there is this like, is there like you just said something about a group, and that really breaks my brain right now.
Well, so the way we model it again is that a group is itself an entity, and so it has some capabilities, the functions. The group can do things with other entities, and there's humans that have a relationship with the group, and if the group is acting on behalf of all the humans in it, it's just another entity that is represented by its
Mm.
own workload with its
I
own business
have
logic and its own credentials.
I have a philosophical objection to groups acting on doing something collectively. Uh, that having to do with accountability. Like if a group screws up, who do you put in jail?
The family.
Well, think about a board of
That's
directors.
Stalinist.
Think
No.
think about think about a board of directors. It's a good example where a board of directors has authority over an organizational entity, can fire the CEO, but it really is through a vote from the directors of the board, and then it's the board that makes the decision. Just like an organization is in fact represented by all the people who act on its behalf, but it's its own legal entity.
Mhm.
So accountability accrues to the organization, not, and there's no liability that transfers to the individuals, at least in some, in corporations, right? There may be, of course, limited liability partnerships and stuff like that. So accountability is really a business logic thing. It's and the legal what we realize is that all chains of authority always end up with a human, because even behind an organization there's a human that needs to create it. But then the accountability flow is a legal chain, if you want. And you say, when this type of decision is made by a board of directors, then it's the organization that's liable. If it's a misdeed by the CEO, then and the CEO is abusing the authority that he has on behalf of the org, then the accountability flows to the CEO and the guy gets fired. So,
Mhm.
So it's always a human for now. I think we should be aware that
yes.
the world can
Yeah.
change.
Yeah, but I mean, ultimately, you could say in software terms, you could have a distributed system where a consortium of workloads, uh, collectively makes a decision. Like
Totally.
we
Yes.
could say that. I just don't know if it is if maybe that's a higher level concept than what we're trying to do here, just in terms of
I
architectural
think
layering.
I think that Manu is counseling against is designing ourselves into an architectural corner. Sorry, Hank has had his hand up for a while. Sorry, Hank.
Yeah, it is a little bit off topic. No, related topic. I just want to give an example for a certificate that speaks for the group. I'm privy to the implementation of direct anonymous attestation for TPM 2.0 right now in
Mhm.
an enterprise context, and that is scenario where a DA issuer issues a certificate for a group of attesters, and they all sign evidence with that group key. So that's in order to just detect misbehavior in that group, and the whole group is flagged. That's a scalability thing, mostly, and sometimes it's a obfuscation mechanism that if the verifier should not know who is actually compromised, that is then for the attester owner to find out. And so that would be speaking with multiple identity documents to multiple parties. So with the group certificate to the verifier, but for the more diagnostic things with a specific identity document. So at least I know a living case that does it. I don't know if it's relevant here, to be honest.
What would add to that discussion here is, I think we're indeed talking into very specific use case, whereas we started off of a very generic ERD diagram. So I think on the generic terms, it still holds, even though we have to drill down on those cases. What I would consider adding, though, is maybe on the left-hand side, I mean, trying to think of it visually, maybe there is a workload as a static kind of template, but then there is the set of inputs, maybe the delegation, pre-authorization, the assembly of that group, which the workload is going to represent later on, that kind of feeds into this funnel, so to speak, and then goes through the pipeline. Because all in all, I think workload, I mean, in our software terms, is still going to be an instantiated software entity. It's gonna have a logic and it's gonna have a set of inputs it started with. So whether it's acting on behalf of a group or a person, at the point where it's launched, it's no longer, I think, part of its behavior kind of changing ability. It's rather the fact that it has been instantiated to represent somebody or a group of those guys. So I think bottom line, boiling down to saying maybe we just need to kind of feed it in on the left-hand side to say, yeah, there is a set of environmentals that go into the creation of the identity.
Yeah.
But I think it's entities are the left to the workload template, because you say I'm gonna write a workload that's gonna manage seats on an airplane, for instance, reservations of those seats. The entities are the seats themselves. The workload is managing the seats, and then there's multiple instances of that workload. So I do think that essentially the workload is the actor, right? That the digital actor that acts on behalf of those entities. So I do believe that it's a good point. I think this flow starts with entities, workload, and then workload instances.
There's something I want to try. I started this whiteboard that I wanted to show. So let's see. I'm gonna create I don't use this often, so bear with me for a second. All right. It's now showing me a bunch of different things. Oh my God. This is a new whiteboard. I haven't seen it yet. But I have this luxury of a laptop with a pen. I want to show you. So let's see. So if over here, it's not very responsive. So I have a workload. Okay, bear with me because it's clearly sucks. And the workload has a credential. And this credential basically says, I will prove to somebody that I am, this workload. And we already talked about how a workload can have a credential, but a workload comes from a template, but it's sort of, it's one follows the other, and it's basically an acyclic, like it's a tree, effectively. But maybe what really is, it's an acyclic graph. So there is another thing in the entity relationship diagram that has a group. Let's put a G in here. And the group has a relationship to workloads as it's composed of different workloads, but it can also have a credential that represents the entire group. So in that case, we are not going to have a tree like, one to many, one to many, one to many, but we're going to have, effectively an acyclic graph of some sort. So workloads can have directly a credential. A workload can be part of a group, and then a group can have a credential. And similarly, we can say that separately, I don't know, credential can have be representing a workload, or maybe there is another relationship saying that credential is contains a delegated, I don't know, identity. So I'm just going to close this. This
So
is not
one
working very
practical
well.
observation I noticed while you were speaking, you've, even in this very simple explanation, you've skipped over workload identity. You jumped from workload to credential. And I think this is the actual way, we humans reason about them when we first encounter those terms. So maybe, just maybe, we reverse the relationship that we have in the ERD. Instead of saying we have workload, identity, credential, so it's credential represents an identity. We can also say credential stores an identity, identifier, sorry, not an identity. So maybe, because these are many to many, we can reverse them, I think, without much harm. But maybe it's going to be easier to reason about. And I guess, yes, it is orthogonal to the core of the question about groups. But what would happen to this representation if we said workload, workload instance, workload identity, credentials, and then credential would have identifiers embedded in it? Like a claim, I'm trying to kind of maybe downplay a bit.
Then you can skip identity too. You can say workload has credentials. And credentials in turn contain identifiers that in turn reflect identities.
Yes, I think. I'm not sure if that's going the right direction, though. I just wanted to pause it there, because the credential purpose is really the essence of the identity. I think the way we want to emphasize identities is because we want to emphasize the fact that you can have multiple identities and you can have multiple uses thereof, not to mention they might be correlatable or not. So if we make it too dumbed down, then it's going to be hard for the implementers to really kind of have those guardrails between in place, employing the proper separation. But to your point, I think yes, it can also be modeled that way. Whether we want to, I don't know.
So it's funny that we're having this discussion, because one of the things that we realized when we implemented the mesh is that the primary identifier slash identity slash credential, all of those things are smooshed together. In our implementation, they're smooshed together. So we use a secret key, a symmetric key, to represent an entity of something, a certain entity of a certain type. And that secret key enables us then is like the DNA, if you want, like the DNA of a specific individual of a species. And it enables us to do then cryptographic operations from the identifier itself. For instance, we can derive keys, which then enables us to encrypt, an unlimited number of identifiers and a limited number of other keys that are all mathematically bound to that initial identifier, which is a symmetric key. So, and we got to that because we precisely didn't know how to maintain the associations between identifiers and credentials or keys, that enable to verify the credentials, the signing keys or the symmetric authenticated encryption keys. And so by just collapsing all that and saying every entity starts with a first primary key, so that you can then you can have a key chain, you can derive keys, and now you can, secure an unlimited number of identifiers and other keys. That enabled us to have, just like if you think about, any living species has its own DNA, and the DNA, every cell in the body of an individual is genetically related to that DNA. So in our implementation, all of those things collapse into one identifier slash key,
Yeah,
and
well,
then credentials are attached to it,
but
and that
Manu,
creates the identity of the thing.
if in this diagram, under identifier, so when I say driver's license, passport, SSN,
Yep.
fingerprint, key could go in there.
Yes, no, I'm not arguing. I think this is good, but I was echoing what Matthias is saying, which is there's we could almost swap them, and I'm just echoing that we realize that all of that collapses into one thing,
Okay.
and that's why maybe
Yeah, but
Matthias
I
is
don't really think it
thinking that.
collapses. So now that I'm listening, and I had a chance to kind of process this, I'm going to add key. It's not
Okay.
typing. Why is it not typing? Oh, no, I just did. Okay. So, what I'm actually going to argue that we should probably preserve this. And I'm trying to justify it. So, an identity is something is more of an abstract term because it's the identifier that make the identity real, right? So further, uh, the mistake here is really that a credential basically needs to tie to a particular identifier that is for a particular workload. Really, what needs to happen is we need to have sort of a separate branch in that ERD saying that different workloads can form groups. We should probably say that. And those groups
I
can
just
have their own identifiers. So we can basically say uh, it's not just every workload becomes identifier. Workload separately, branch off, can form groups with other workloads, negotiate their own identity, and then have credentials around those identities.
I just it's probably implicit, but the identifier is important because a credential becomes useful when it is endorsed by an external party, which
Yes.
allows you to actually do something with it.
Yes.
Okay, good. As long as we all agree with that, that's good.
We do, but on the group part, however, Mark, why would we create a first-class citizen for a grouping specifically instead of just saying a group of workloads is just a workload, a composite one? Like, why, we would need to have a first-class entity specifically for the group.
There might not be multiple workloads for that group. There might be a single workload for a group which has a variety of different credentials.
But that's implied, like, every workload we say can have multiple identities and can have multiple identifiers, and then conversely multiple credentials. And then also the workload can act on behalf of multiple entities, depending on how it was instantiated. Not to mention, together with other workloads, it may have even more of a umbrella identity.
Yeah, in fact, you could solve this. What you're saying is by creating another workload template. So on the far left, that is in fact a group of workloads.
Yeah, that's what I'm kind of probing out.
That thing, once instantiated, can obtain its own identity and have its own credential, and that would make it work.
There's another element. What you just said, the two of you are converging if you agree that a workload is itself and a group are themselves entities. You can generalize that
Yes.
by saying that indeed, you have an entity, you have some code that is acting on behalf of an entity. If the entity is itself a workload, the code that's acting on behalf of the entity is in fact the CI/CD pipeline, for instance, right? That generates the workload itself, the executable. So and then a group is itself an entity, so that now you can generalize that and say there's a piece of code that is acting on behalf of a group, and it doesn't matter what a group of what, it's just a group of other entities. And once you've generalized that, you have your template that you can use. Yeah, sorry, not template is not the right term. The ERD here that you can unfold and that you can recurse as you need to be able to create more sophisticated layers of those entities interacting with each other.
Yeah. So am I hearing that we can basically saying that a group of workloads is basically is can be effectively a choice a group of workloads make to become their own workload with their own, and then then we really don't need to make many changes here.
I mean, we need to explain it in text, but as
Yeah,
far as
yeah,
the first
sure.
diagram goes, simpler it gets, the better.
So I'll just make a note of this. A group of workloads may decide to become a separate entity with its own identity and credentials.
And then it all becomes recursive.
Well, but that's fine. I mean, we already
But which is
like
good, which is what you
yeah,
want, because now you
we're
have a
looking at
pattern.
complex attestations, right? So CPU, GPU, NIC, that's another form of that, right? They're really
Exactly.
separate things, but they present themselves as an
As a
entity outside.
unit, as
Yeah.
a composite
Yeah.
entity.
So
Yes.
what about delegation? Is delegation sort of orthogonal or higher level than this diagram? Basically saying uh, a because like what happens when you present delegated credentials? Does the relying party really care as far as looking at, I was given a credential. The credential represents someone. Does it matter if it's delegated or not? From
Not if
just
the
looking
relying
at the
party.
credential.
So one of the things that we had to wrap our heads around was that the delegation of a credential must be done by an entity that itself has a credential that is how to say that a credential delegation credential, right? So if your relying party trusts that a certain entity can indeed delegate authority to another entity, then you're fine, and so the relying party will just accept that delegated credential as is because it's coming from an entity that it knows can is authorized to do that, has authority to do that. But there you end up having indeed to think about chains of authority because now you have credentials that hop, that move right from one entity to another, and that is now there's a level of indirection there that the relying party has to accept. And so the relying party should only rely on that credential if it basically agrees or trusts or agrees to rely on the entire chain of delegation that may be more than one hop, right? You may have long chains of identity or of delegation of authority. And so if you're part of that chain and you say everybody that's upstream of me is something that I agree to rely on, then you'll just take it at face value and you're good to go. If not, then it becomes more complicated. Now you're collapsing the chain and you need to have individual relationships between the relying party and the other entities that are, participating in a chain.
So Manu, haven't you, in the different words, and of course that's a subset of a problem, but haven't you just defined provenance for the credential relay?
Yeah, I was just gonna say this is a
That's
provenance issue.
Yes, and it's these are all entangled. I mean, we couldn't solve one without the other. You have to, to me, and that's why it's kind of interesting. The rats, for instance, is trying to define, some or standardize some capabilities without really absorbing or internalizing that the technology that they're trying to standardize actually exists. So verifiers in our world must be trusted execution environments because how would you if you have a chain like this, right, how you would trust a representation the result of a verification, the output of a verification, if the verifier itself is not verified. So the provenance, the places where the bits come from for a verifier, whether it's the reference values or the attestation evidence, all of those things, the provenance is necessary for a relying party to be able to accept the business logic that was executed on the verification and delivered to the relying party. So provenance and identity, of course, are directly, entangled. We can't separate them.
So,
Yeah. Sorry.
sorry. No, please finish your thought.
No. That's the,
Oh,
I can go rambling for too long, so please stop me. Yeah.
I just wanted to say, I mean, what popped into my head as you were speaking, maybe for the, diagram purposes, we just need a layer like at the bottom of that, pointing through arrows that, all those entities do generate provenance records. Like workload instantiation leaves, I mean, workload itself comes from somewhere. Of course, we have some things we take as input. But then when we instantiated something, we do create a record of provenance as well. When we create a credential, we also do, when we endorse the credential, by the way, I'm not sure if we should have an endorsement as an entity somewhere in this diagram as well. But keeping to the provenance, what I would propose to add to the drawing is really like a horizontal block at the bottom or top,
Yeah,
which ties them together.
yeah. I just put a note. We should probably just do that. Discuss relationship with entity in the ERD to provenance and how it might get recorded, how it might get discovered. Okay, so what I'm hearing is this is probably okay to draw as is, but then we'll need some notes along the lines of what we just said below. And we can, I can wordsmith it and we can discuss in next meeting. I wanted to,
How about, are you going to put the entity in front, or you're pushing back against the concept of an entity above or before on the left of workload?
no, well, so entity here is in terms of entity relationship diagram. So entity relationship diagram is a bunch of boxes. Each box is an entity and it relates to other entities.
Okay.
So workload template is an entity, workload is an entity, workload identity is an entity in this case.
Oh, I
An
see.
identifier is an entity, workload credential is an entity.
Yeah, I
That's how
use
they
the
relate.
word I use the word entity differently. So
Right, right.
yeah. Sorry
So
about that.
we'll need to, entity is just too generic,
Yes, yeah, but yeah.
just
So
something that exists.
it's a thing. Well, no, entity is interesting because it's a thing that exists independently of other things.
Hmm.
So that's why we gravitated towards it, because we were struggling with the term agency, right?
Yeah.
Acting on behalf. And so the word entity represents, I mean, is in the English language, there's something that exists independently of other things.
Yeah.
And so that is also tied to agency, because if you want to have true agency, you need to be able to act independently of everything else.
Well, I mean, in security, we call these things principles,
Principles. Oh, I see what you mean. Like a
right?
principal
So a
entity, right?
principle, yeah, a
Yeah.
principle can actually has agency and can be
That
held
might be
accountable.
an interesting term to use indeed. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, do
All
you mean
right.
the
Mark to
principal, like with a
Principal,
P-A-L?
P-A-L.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Okay, of course. Yeah, there's a huge standard reference to that, of course.
Yeah. Okay. So
Mark,
the
before
other,
we move on,
yeah.
I just wanted to make sure I understand the wrapping point. I mean, as is, indeed, it's to be drawn. I think it's a good basis. Where I think we still want to debate is whether we want something on the diagram on the left-hand side, like more the inputs, than whether or how we embed the provenance. What I would like you to consider also putting in the notes for future consideration, unless we know already, we have a group consensus not to do it, whether to consider workload credential endorsement as something we want to put somewhere in this hierarchy. I say it's maybe possible, maybe worthwhile considering. This is an immature thought at this point. At this moment, I just don't want to lose it.
Well, I'm adding your comment here to the doc so that we can
Yeah,
also
and
not forget about it.
that's all I wanted to accomplish,
Yeah.
especially given I don't know where I'm gonna be able
So
to
this
join
is
back.
what I'm hoping to also have like really good wording for. So like in the very beginning of the document, we say, and every architecture should do this. We basically say, what are the core use cases that we care about this reference architecture to address, right? So I listed four. Again, not married to this list. We can talk about it, but industry standard credentials for confidential workload. So we talk basically is, you know, how that we want every workload to have industry standard credentials. It's kind of I don't know if it's a use case, more of a requirement. I do not know. We care that these identifiers for confidential workloads are stable, right? So it's it's not really a question of trustworthiness necessarily. I will give you that. But there's such an important business requirement that these identifiers are stable. Again, maybe it doesn't belong in the use cases, but if they're not stable, good luck. But there is a couple of use cases that are really use cases, and Mateusz, maybe you can help with wording here, but I call them establishing workload provenance and utilizing workload provenance, right? So the first one is just ensuring that something exists that can be used later. So making sure we don't lose track of how did something that we care about and give power to came into being. And the second one is okay, now that we know that this thing exists, how do we make use of it? And I would like to have maybe one paragraph description for each. Does that make sense?
It does, however, it's contingent on a first question, which is really where do we draw the line? Because provenance itself is a very huge topic with quite a lot of solutions, but also divergence in the ecosystem. Like specifically on the utilizing provenance. Well, the biggest problem I see is really how do you even assemble the provenance, across the entire heterogeneous ecosystem? Like where do you stop? Because you can go all the way back to what the compiler or what the developer who wrote the compiler, who he was, what machine was he using.
Yeah.
So there is quite a lot of work there in the bodies, like the in Toto group. There is this Salsa group as well.
Yeah.
I believe we just need to find a good like anchoring point so that our stuff feeds into theirs. We don't try to reinvent or cross into their turf. We just say, hey, this is where confidential computing environments can start, enveloping your stuff with our protection so that we at least give you the binding. Because to me, it's really what we are about is really about both providing the binding at the time when you enter the funnel of confidential computing and then the verifiability of that binding throughout the rest of the ecosystem, ideally with zero trust.
Yeah.
So, I don't know yet, and I'm open to suggestions. How do we start the entrance to the funnel, so to speak?
So, yeah, I would like us to not to step on anyone's toes. This goes for rats, this goes for whimsy only as much as necessary, right? So if whimsy is as I consider incompatible with computational computing, we should point this out to them and ask them to fix it. And then we should stop short of changing these things. Like similarly with rats, and Hank knows this, right? I'm basically saying, look, rats, you lack a relying party empathy. Your RC draft basically says the relying party will see a lot of stuff that will break relying parties the moment it's introduced, because every workload upgrade is going to cause you to chase your clients or relying parties or whoever looks at your credentials, right? And we'll simply say, look, your identifiers need to be stable. Rats needs to figure out exactly how to do that. Now we can work with them on that, but that's the separation. We shouldn't be.
Yeah, so for the lying party empathy, so I think Afarsi, which started in the confidential compute domain, there are these. I think there are layers of requirements, how strong or how direly you need those, what is mandatory to understood and what not. So the values of most of these items can be set to unknown or binary, although they allow for a range of values. And I'm not entirely sure how anti-try this approach is, to be honest. So you are saying you have highlighted the lack of empathy
this is
multiple times now.
right. This is where I land on this, Hank. Usually, if you put a word in a dictionary, somebody's going to use it, and people who don't understand this word are going to give you a blank stare. So what it means here is I'm basically saying, look, if you are going to and this may be a bit of an absolute statement, but I really do stand by it. If you put something into a credential that will change uh, while, okay, so this is how there is an invariant. What's approved? What constitutes an approved application running on approved hardware? That's an invariant. Uh, as in, for as far as my relying party is concerned, that's all it cares about, is that my client is an approved payroll application running on approved hardware. It, through level of indirection, somebody else determines what's an approved application and what is approved hardware. The moment you express in the credential anything that can change about a client while it's still approved, will break that relying party, right? And you do that, but you break your warranty. You void your warranty. That's the tack I would like rats to adopt for what I call the enterprise use case. I'm sure there are other use cases where that doesn't apply, but for the technology to be successful in an enterprise, please consider this invariant. Rats, RC, they don't do that today. It's not, well, we'll put a bunch of stuff in there and you relying party go figure out what it is that you care about. It's stronger than that. Don't put anything there that will break it.
Yeah.
But here, Mark, however, I would say maybe this is more, requires a bit more finesse, because some identifiers may well indeed change, and some relying parties might even be, aware of the change and the change vector trajectory, and be welcoming those change to upgrade their claims or their security posture. I think if I'm reading you correctly, what you're really about is making sure it's well documented about which claims are stable and to which degree. There has to be a stable foothold, so to speak, but I would permit some of the claims in the credentials to mutate, provided this is a very known contract about, what's the projected trajectory of the change, and how the relying party, shall they choose to, even interpret that claim, how should they react in the event it changes. I just want to extrapolate from saying, hey, it has to be rock solid and immutable towards it. The mutation has to be, confined and subject to a contract.
But
Yeah.
I think what Mark is saying is, if you talk about claims and think about verifiable credentials and stuff, is that the subject of the claim must be a stable identifier, so that you know that you're talking about a specific entity, a workload or whatever, and then you can have attribute or claims that, of course, change, that you may describe, a change of state. But it's the identification of the entities so that the relying party knows who we're talking about. And that must be persistent and long-lived. And in fact, it's true for all entities, because any business logic that's going to need to make decisions based on information that comes about those entities, all of those identifiers need to be long-lived. So I think the way that what we realize to be able to protect agents or the relying parties from changes upstream in any chain of custody or authority is that the verifier has a bigger role than just verifying evidence. It is really about verifying that the attester is as intended. So, and the as intended is tied to the provenance of where the reference values are coming from. And so if the verifier gets the right reference values, and when the attester is changing and you have provenance for the reference values, then the relying party can decide, great, the verifier did the job that the attester is as intended. And the as intended is about as much as the relying party can take, because the relying party shouldn't be in the business of doing a whole bunch of verification upstream. We couldn't find a way to make it scale. If every verifier had to be aware of everything else that happens upstream, it just doesn't work. So as intended is how we solve that, and that basically pushes upstream the the job of verifying against reference values for which the verifier has
Yeah,
provided.
it's one of the, and in fact, I will go stronger. It's one of the gravest architectural mistakes in rats that the decision on what is intended to be the thing is left to the relying party.
Yes.
And again, hey, no disrespect.
There are different scenarios here. I'm well aware of a huge amount of hardware out there that relies on such relying parties. But yes, you are correct. Not every scenario does.
Right,
That is
I
very
understand.
correct.
Right, which is why this carve out when I say that this is your enterprise case, this is for muggles out there. Again, no disrespect to them, but they're trying to do loan origination.
But I would go stronger, Mark. I think it's more than enterprise. I think it's Hank. I think it's a higher layer in the stack essentially. So I think Rats has been dealing indeed with chips or low-level systems, and may those low-level systems may rely directly on attestation evidence. So the relying party is a low-level chip that doesn't have a higher construct. But any internet scale service, right, whether it's enterprise or not, is going to rely on distributed computing with lots of machines involved, lots of instances. You need resilience, you need decentralization and all that good stuff. So you have to start abstracting or solidifying. I'm sorry, the identities of those. You need an identity layer basically that does not exist at the RATS layer. And
I'm
so
not entirely
that's
sure that doesn't exist. So every thing that can be identified with the crypto key that gives you evidence can be recognized by the verifier. And if all instance identities that the verifier expects to find are identifiable, giving you evidence, then you can do an instance identity value too. The testing environment is recognized and the associated instance of the tester is not known to be compromised, which I think is what Mark was asking for. It seems to me the semantics exist. That the relying party doesn't require all fields to be there. It can choose and pick, and there are only a few others. So basically, if you're not diverging from, I want to say, value two, everything is golden. You can even break it down to a bool, I guess, at some point. You do not have to use R4Z. It is not necessary to use that information model, which is called a data model, which is stupid. I'm not entirely sure that Rats is doing a mistake here. I think that R4 is just not for this use case, right? So you can literally create an eat with a notion that this is an attestation result, like a
Yeah,
CM type,
yeah.
and put a bool in there and be done. And if that
So
is what your relying party wants, you are absolutely fine. Just put that in the spec.
yeah, I will say one other thing on that, Hank, and but it's not a dispute we're going to settle now, but
Okay.
it's just something I want you to consider. So there are, we already talked about how, your workload might get updated because somebody, fixed a bug and deployed a new thing. Or maybe the cloud decided to update the firmware on the CPU. So that's another change. So you're updating the hardware, you're updating the software. And in all cases, I'm basically saying insulate those talking to you from having to know that this happened. It's only the entity that needs to know what's approved
It's a verifier.
that cares. Okay. But let me now put a twist on it. As you might in an enterprise that has 7,000 applications, right, such as what I'm dealing with, somebody may decide that the payroll application that was running on a legacy systems yesterday is now going to be running in trust execution environments. So it's another change. We just went from legacy workload to confidential workload, and yet the same principle applies. What constitutes the payroll application has not changed. So what that means in technical terms is the, mm, you know, the way this thing is obtaining its credentials didn't require attestation before, but it requires attestation now, and yet the relying parties shouldn't care. And the RATS as it is today does not consider that part at all, that your workload may not even be a testing.
I am not entirely sure that is correct. I just think that R4Z is addressing a different type of relying party, and that each already is allowing for that. But maybe we need to whip something up and write it down to see what is conflicting where.
Well, I actually did. So did you see my email to
Okay.
the rat mail list that I
Uh,
basically outlined that use
this
case?
week.
It's seen no engagement so far. But so by the way, this document I'm referencing it from my email there, but it's this one. And let me put the email, the link in the chat that you can see. And I'm actually, I believe I'm speaking about that in here as well. Because again, anything I always say, I always reserve the right to be wrong because we're debating here, trying to arrive at the truth. So, but
I see. It's from last week, right? So
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
latest.
It's from
Yeah,
Friday.
yeah,
I,
okay.
I
Yeah,
promised I
I got
promised
it.
to talk about it, but what that email says, and it has a link to this document, is effectively what this
Mhm.
document says. All right. And this proposes no solutions. This is just a requirements document, right? And it basically says, given everything the previous paragraphs say, help us do this.
Mhm.
Okay. So anyway, we'll probably need to come back to this later. We'll have a little bit more content to discuss next time. Thank you again so much for showing up. Any parting comments?
Happy Thanksgiving.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Yeah, happy Thanksgiving, guys.
Yeah.
And you too. Yeah, I'll see you in the week.
Yeah. Thank you,
All right.
guys.
Thank you
Take
all.
care.
Bye-bye.
Take it easy.
Bye bye.